Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Homes and Safe Communities on Wednesday, the 11th of September. It is 6 p.m. Before we start the meeting, may I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they use the remote raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the chair and the Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. For the sake of the recording, the chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic officer know. So please, could I welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers, and also to anyone watching the live meeting broadcast. Moving on to agenda and beginning with the agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any? Councillor Hennessy.
Yes. There we are. David Dutch, Tenant Liaison Officer.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Payne.
And Gareth Ball.
Okay, sorry, Liz, did I see you pop up then?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
No, it's fine, no problem at all. We have one apology through to ourselves at Democratic from Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 10th of July. Are members happy to approve? And can I have a proposer and seconder? Councillor Hennessy?
Councillor propose.
Councillor Hanks?
Happy to second.
Okay, thank you. And item 3, declarations of any interest. Do we have any?
Chair, can I declare, Councillor Aviett, yes. Can I just declare an personal interest in items 7, 6, 7 and 8, please, as I'm a council tenant. Thank you.
Councillor Hennessy?
Exactly the same thing. 6, 7 and 8, I'm a council tenant. It's personal but not prejudicial.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on to agenda item 4, I do have something I'd like to run by committee. It has been suggested that we move agenda item 10 up the agenda to follow on after the annual self-assessment. I have agreed to this myself, but I want to see if committee have any objections. Are committee happy for me to move that agenda item?
Happy to move.
Okay, I see no objections. So agenda item 10 will now follow after the annual self-assessment. Okay, thank you. So agenda item 4 is the annual corporate safeguarding report 23 to 24. I believe Mike is presenting this. If you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Members will have seen this report previously. It's an annual report from the Director of Social Services. The report originally went to Cabinet on the 18th of July, and a recommendation from Cabinet that the report was referred to all scrutiny committees, including governance, audit, corporate performance and resources, learning and culture, healthy living and homes and safe. The report itself indicates the committee should consider particularly the elements of the report in line with their portfolio areas, and attached at Appendix 1 is the report and the areas aligned to this scrutiny committee are seen at section D of the attached appendix. The report itself goes through the legal duties on the local authority in relation to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and also guidance under the Part 7 of the Act in relation to corporate safeguarding for the council. In respect of the key issues for consideration in the report, as you will have seen before, whilst Appendix 1 highlights all of the work completed across the council in relation to improvements to our corporate safeguarding arrangements, a number of areas have been highlighted for specific note, and they're highlighted at 2.2 through to 2.5, and I'll quickly run through those. Under 2.2, our data disclosure and barring service checks. As you can see, we've increased the speed of the checking process by implementing an electronic transfer system for those disclosures, which that provides us with checks and approvals within 24 to 48 hours in most cases, which has certainly improved our safer recruitment practice, particularly in my area as an example, building cleaning, where all staff require enhanced DBS checks. And given the rate of the vacancy rate within that service, with people leaving, people arriving, it's imperative that we have those DBS checks in place as soon as possible to recruit into service. At 2.3, last year, members of this committee will remember discussions in relation to elected members taking up their DBS checks. And as you can see from there, those members who hold specific roles and responsibilities have completed their enhanced DBS checks. And it's just to note that those arrangements are in place not only for officers of the council but also for key elected members. Under 2.4, there is it indicates that there are ongoing and sustained increases in safeguarding activities, such as Section 5 allegations against practitioners, child protection reports and registrations, and adult safeguarding reports. And even though that doesn't necessarily fall within the remit of this committee, you'll see within the report detail and information in relation to that area of activity. And under 2.5, the development of performance information systems to enable us to improve our safeguarding activity across all of our directorates. And that data dashboard is continuing to be developed. It is available, but it is being developed and fine-tuned as we go. But obviously gives us a bit of a can opener into areas where we will see emerging themes or emerging activity. Under the report, whilst the report itself indicates there are no direct resource implications, it's worthy of note that the director had indicated that there is an increased awareness of safeguarding across the council, and also from individuals and agencies reporting safeguarding concerns through to service. And there's an indication there that a review is required in order to deal with that increased capacity, and looking at those that are already known to service and those who are considered at risk but not known or are eligible for statutory services. Social Services will continue to review the staffing numbers and structure in order to meet that increasing demand. If I can take you through now to Appendix 1 and Section D particularly, which highlights the activity across housing, community safety and our SRS colleagues. Bear with me while I flick through the report. So under Section D, You'll note that safeguarding remains a key priority for our housing team, and regular training continues to be provided. We also, which is a change from last year's report, Cardiff and Vale Regional Safeguarding Board was the only governance measure in place in relation to safeguarding. However, subsequently, local safeguarding groups have now been set up, one in Cardiff and one in the Vale, both to take the learning from each other effectively into our own organisations, and for us to be able to to place a spotlight on issues particular to the local area. And that's chaired by the head of performance at social services, and a number of key officers, senior officers, attend the local safeguarding arrangements. Within the service, a number of my staff have now been trained to undertake child and adult practice reviews, and in the case of Nick Jones, has been acting as chair and or reviewer on some reviews that have been allocated by the board. We continue to identify and target support towards vulnerable people. We continue with our tenant profiling. As it says there, this is about us really getting ahead of the train. It's an intelligent-led approach, and enables us obviously to look at maintaining contact with residents and our interventions prior to them escalating to sort of the critical stages. I've flagged within our response there that members will be aware that our resettlement schemes have expanded over the last 3 years or so, and we've identified additional training requirements for staff, and I've flagged there honour-based violence and forced marriage as a specific issue that some of the team that will be required, and ongoing discussions with Welsh Government and rolling that training resource across the service. In the table underneath that section, you can see that the main number of referrals comes from a housing solutions team. And just to be clear, that's because all children in families that are placed in any of our temporary accommodation, including our hostel, we make referrals regardless, as a means of highlighting to social services that those families are receiving accommodation support or services from us. Moving on, I've mentioned temporary accommodation, and we continue to use obviously hotel accommodation and other forms of temporary accommodation at the moment due to the extreme pressures on the housing service. And we flag there a number of solutions that are in place to address any safeguarding concerns, and contacts and resources that we have in place to keep in contact with residents in our temporary accommodation. In terms of safeguarding activity within the Vauda SV area, as you can see, we continue to deliver actions within our regional strategic work with Cardiff. And just a flavour, I guess, in terms of local context for the Vale specifically, some outputs there. So in 23-24, there were 94 multi-agency risk assessment risk assessment conferences, which resulted in multi-agency meetings. And that's a decrease from the figures that we saw in 22-23. Partly that's due to the way that we changed the way that we deal now with referrals into service, in that we now have twice weekly discussions, which effectively acts as a prioritisation and a sifting process to ensure that only the high, medium and high cases that need that multi-agency response are referred to the conferences. And as you can see, in 23-24, we had 520 cases that we discussed in year, which were considered as part of those twice weekly meetings. And as I mentioned, diverting cases away from the Marek resource. In terms of DARC, now DARC members will have had reports over the years. The DARC service was a new service that was piloted and then introduced permanently, which dealt with low risk cases, which previously were not being addressed and dealt with at that time. As you can see, we received 626 PPNs from South Wales Police into service. Of those survivors, victims, 192 were agreed to receive support from our VDAS service, our Vale Domestic Abuse Service, who we commissioned to provide our specialist domestic abuse resource. Target hardening, we continue to target hardening where we've undertaken risk assessments. And as you can see, in 2023-24, 102 of our DARC clients received target hardening, which was an increase from the previous year. In terms of training, there's a requirement on all local authority staff to have Group 1 training of the National Training Framework. And as you can see, we trained an additional 942 staff members last year, bringing us up to a total of 4,639 council staff who have been trained to Group 1. And we continue then to roll out the more detailed training for those staff who are more closely working with clients and victims of domestic abuse. Antisocial behaviour, just to flag, in 23-24, we had 1,979 incidents reported, and of those, 1,336 were processed, i.e. they were investigated, and an outcome was delivered. Channel panel, which is part of our Prevent programme, there's a regional multi-agency channel panel which discusses individuals where we identify people at risk or where we assess there isn't, and we also then assess the nature and extent of that risk. And it's just to indicate, in the Vale in 23-24, there were no referrals to channel for the Vale of Glamorgan. However, what we have indicated there, and given, I guess, what we've seen over the last few months, rising tensions within our communities, and as a result, we're looking to develop, as I say, a training matrix then for professionals, but also increasing the ability for people to refer into channel panel if there are any concerns raised in relation to individuals who are at risk of exploitation. In terms of SRS, I know committee received a report before the summer recess from Helen Picton, but just to pick up on terms of some of the work in relation to doorstep crime and scams, you can see there the service continues to deal with doorstep crime cases, scams, and vulnerable civil cases. And unfortunately, they did identify 16 residents have been identified through the year as having suffered doorstep crime as a result, or as having been on the receiving end of a scam. There's an example there of a rogue trader, and pleasing to see that the service were successfully prosecuted the individual under the Fraud Act, and you can see the penalty and sentencing as a result of the work of officers in dealing with that. National Safeguarding Week occurs every year, and again, SRS officers heavily involved in National Safeguarding Week, and we're involved in providing presentations to Money and Pension Services Wales, and also training to the 50 Plus Forum volunteers. And we also visited a number of GP surgeries throughout the Vale to raise awareness at areas that are non-council, I suppose, traditional areas where rogue traders could be identified in conversations with GPs. Core blockers, I know, was a particular interest when Helen raised this report a little while ago, and there's some information there in relation to the relatively small number of core blockers that we do have available to us, but you can see that the difference that those core blockers are estimated to have made, and potentially 82 scams prevented. In terms of safeguarding for young people, there's the activity there of our compliance enforcement teams. We received 111 complaints regarding underage sale of alcohol, vapes, tobacco and knives. With the assistance of our young volunteers, 53 attempts were made to purchase a number of age-restricted products. Unfortunately, 10 of these did result in sale. However, clearly, those sales were investigated and enforcement action taken against those shop owners. And the last area there under taxi licensing, whilst the vast majority of our taxi drivers are reputable, there was one case referred to licensing committee following a conviction, and the application to be licensed as a taxi was refused by committee. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the report, but happy to take any questions specifically in relation to Homes and Safe activity.
Okay, thank you. I was just about to ask if there are any questions, and I can see Councillor Payne has her hand up already. If you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike. I'm interested in, I think it's 5.1 at the beginning, I think, says about there are no resource implications. Well, I know with the rise in reporting of safeguarding, everything drops for safeguarding because that's a priority. So what I'm interested in is the impact it has on the existing work programme in terms of, you know, there is a massive rise, and rightly so, but it does have resource implications, and it does have implications for also the impact it has on staff, you know, because it's quite a stressful thing to do.
Yeah, I think the report indicates that whilst from a corporate perspective, there are no direct resource implications as a result of the report, you are quite right. On individual departments and directorates, there are resource implications which will need to be funded. Within the body of the main, within Appendix 1 and in the body of the report, you will also see there's a table in there in relation to the Social Services Directorate, which identifies the number of adult referrals specifically, and it talks around those referrals have plateaued over the last period at around, I think it was 800 plus referrals. But you are right, the more that we advertise and we make people aware, and people are aware of their legal responsibilities, because it's everyone's duty to report safeguarding concerns, that has an implication on services. You're quite right, and we will prioritise, this case of prioritising, I guess, within the resource envelope that we have.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike.
Chair, would you like to bring in Councillor Lloyd Selby?
Apologies for that. Sorry, apologies for that. My internet kicked me out temporarily. Councillor Lloyd Selby, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike, for taking us through that report and talking us through what's clearly a really important area of work. Can I just bring you back to the MARF referrals that are being made by Housing Solutions? I mean, my understanding of a MARF referral is it should be made if there's a risk if there's a view that a child is at risk of harm. So I'm surprised to see that every child who's accommodated in temporary accommodation is automatically referred through the MARF, the multi-agency referral process, to social services. So it would be helpful, given the capacity pressures, it would be helpful to understand the rationale for that, and also whether or not that's done with the consent of children and families involved.
Yeah, so it goes back a few years, Councillor Lloyd Selby. There was a child practice review, probably 6 or 7 years ago now, where one of the recommendations that came out of the child practice review was around information sharing. And there was, from memory, there was an incident or an issue within the council's hostel. And I think it's fair to say that we would prefer not to put families in hostel or bed and breakfast or a shared form of accommodation. I think the issue for us, certainly now and was the case then, was the fact that we don't know necessarily the background to any of the families that come to us for housing accommodation. They may or may not be known to social services. They may or may not be known to other organisations. So whilst it appears to be a sledgehammer possibly to crack a nut, if you see what I mean, for us, it's about the risks associated, particularly with some of the families. In relation to whether families give consent, we share that information as part of their application with us, where we are obviously trying to ensure that any family that comes to us, any child or adult in any of our accommodation, to ensure that there is appropriate safeguarding arrangements in place. I understand the rationale, as you mentioned, around resources and capacity. I think it's fair to say that a significant number of families that do come through our system, through homelessness and through temporary accommodation, do require an awful lot of support.
Yeah, thank you. If I may respond to that, Chair. I mean, obviously a MARF referral is a significant decision, and for children and families to be subject to that is a big decision when they're already under pressure and stress. I suppose my concern when I saw that statistic is, is this making it more difficult for children with families to come to us? But I'm reassured by you confirming that this is very much part of the process, so we're very transparent about it. And the aim is to make sure safeguarding issues are picked up and families who find themselves in that very vulnerable position are appropriately supported, because I imagine a number of those MARF referrals don't result in any action.
No, the majority. No, just to assure you, the majority don't. But it allows us to, as an organisation, to better understand where our families are and what their circumstances are in a point of time, and then being able to target the appropriate resources. So I would say it's a support mechanism rather than a fear for our families that something untoward is going to happen. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to ensure the safety of the child, clearly in relation to children specifically, and invariably that it is an information sharing tool. Social services have a fairly, if you speak to one of my colleagues in social services, they will say that a hostile environment or a shared environment is no place for a child, and is alerting them to risks associated with that. But there's also the realism and the pragmatism, I guess, in the situation we find ourselves in at the moment, if not a hotel or a bed and breakfast, where else? And that is the difficulty we're in.
Thank you, Mike.
Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. Councillor Lovelock Edwards, would you like to come in? I can see your hand is up.
Chair, can you hear me?
We can now, yes, and we can
Right,
see you.
okay. I pressed the wrong button, so that's on me. Autumn term. Sorry, Mike. Yeah, I wasn't going to ask anything on this, but following on from Councillor Lloyd Selby's point about the MARFs and dealing with them from an education setting, I just want reassurance in terms of, you say obviously they're a multi-agency, it's information sharing, it's about support mechanisms, but I just want reassurance in terms of that the child's voice or the vulnerable adult's voice are being sort of heard in those meetings, and just if you can give reassurance in terms of for this meeting on who advocates on behalf of those in those meetings. I know they don't necessarily attend, but you know, just reassurance on in terms of the MARF itself. And the one question that I wanted to ask was in relation to the channel panel. And you know, you sort of clarified why, if there were no referrals, you were then introducing training, and you referenced the increase in incidents of potential threats, and obviously what we've seen over the summer. Has there been any work done that you could share with us now, or could share with us further down the line? The age profile of any sort of particular age group that may well give rise to going through the sort of pathways for referring in, and is it there are zero referrals because there might be a lack of understanding or a lack of awareness as how things have changed in society since the last training through, you know, by the officers and staff linked to that channel panel? Thank you.
Yeah, if perhaps outside of the meeting, perhaps it might be useful for me to be able to, in terms of the MARF arrangements, how many of those actually go on to a multi-agency meeting at all, because my sense is, and I don't have the figures at hand, my sense is the majority don't. And therefore, in relation to your point around voice of the child, that is hugely important to us within the council in relation to placing mechanism in place to ensure that we do. And that's part of our corporate strategic work under our children, young persons strategy, which obviously we have in place, and the voice of the child is an intrinsic part of that strategy. But it might be helpful just to allay some members' fears around how many of those MARFs actually go on to raise flags and concerns, and I'll do that outside of the meeting if that's helpful. In terms of your second point, there's an awful lot of activity already goes on within our schools, both in relation to community cohesion and also our hate crime police liaison officer. There's a lot of community-based focus, and they've been particularly busy, I think it's fair to say, over the last few months. There was a recent report which we've received, which is in relation to the events of the last few months and about some learning and some recommendations. And we're working our way through some of that learning at the moment. Things about how we communicate with our constituents and our residents. As you mentioned, the use of, how can we better arm our head teachers with information to provide that support to their students and schools and what have you. And there's a lot of inter-council contact between ourselves and colleagues in education. In relation to Prevent specifically, probably a couple of years ago, we brought a report to Scrutiny on the channel work and the Prevent work that we do, but it's probably a few years ago, and it's probably, it might be useful, Chair, going forward, I would be happy for us to bring a separate item before committee in relation to the work around the prevent work, and particularly that area around child exploitation, particularly around the work, the issues around hate and racial hatred and other issues that the prevent stream is looking at. I'm happy to do that if that's something that chair and members of the committee would wish to receive, and give you a bit more detail with regard to the activities. As I say, it's relatively limited in the Vale. As you can see, none in the last year that have been referred. But my concern is that, are we reporting it if we believe it, and do people know where and how to report that to? And I think that's the point I make in the report there, specifically around training to other professionals, not necessarily those dealing with community safety or community cohesion issues, but more widely across the council, because there's lots of council interventions and professional interventions with individuals, and making sure that those triggers or those flags, if they're identified, are they being reported? But as I say, Chair, if that is something that you would wish us to do, we can add that, I'm sure, with committee's agreement to the work programme going forward.
Yeah,
Thank you. Chair, may I come in? Sorry, go on.
Yes.
I would welcome that. And I think that, as you indicated, Mike, the dynamics, but how instances or incidents of this and the targeting of vulnerable children has changed from when Prevent was first introduced, and the rationale behind Prevent first being introduced. So I would welcome a report, especially on channel panel. Thank you.
Yes, I would be quite happy to welcome that report as an addition to the forward work programme as well. Anybody else wishing to speak on this? I see no hands up, no indications. So first off, I'd like to ask if committee are happy to note this report for reference. Councillor Hennessy?
Happy to note.
Okay, can I have a seconder for noting? Councillor Hanks? And Councillor Loy-Selby? Yes, okay, thank you. Also, as suggested by Mike, our committee happy for a further report to come to us to be added onto the forward work programme on the channel panel?
Yeah, happy.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I don't see anybody arguing against that. Myself and the Vice Chair have already indicated that we are happy. So thank you very much, Mike, for that. We can go on to the next item now, which is a reference from Cabinet, and it is the annual self-assessment 2023 to 24. I believe Miles is going to take this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as you say, this is a referral from Cabinet of the 5th of September. Members will recall that I bring the quarters to you each quarter, and there's one on this agenda as well, in terms of the performance against the annual delivery plan. This is essentially the end of year document. So it's 129 pages. It's a large piece of work. So there's been a presentation prepared, a PowerPoint presentation, and I'd like to go through. Chair, if you're happy, if Liz can share, because it might make it a bit of an easier read for members. So if Liz can share that PowerPoint, then I'll take you through the various elements.
We're just setting that up now, Miles. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to remind committee, this is a legal requirement for us to complete the annual self-assessment. Those who have been around perhaps as long as I have will recall that There was compulsory competitive tendering back in the late 80s, followed by best value. So there's been various processes brought in by the government to ensure that councils are performing well, and they're providing services that the citizens need. So this is the latest iteration of that. Essentially, it's part of the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021, and we have a requirement to undertake an annual assessment of our services every year. This year is slightly different because in one electoral term, you must have an independent assessment. So I think I advised members at the last committee that there'll be an independent assessment undertaken by a peer review panel appointed by the Welsh Local Government Association, and that will be later on in the year. So we'll take you to the next slide, please, Liz. So this slide takes you to the purpose, and I won't read all the slides if members will be happy with me shaking through the highlights. So essentially, it assesses how we spend our money, whether we spend it wisely, whether we're doing things well, how well are we run, and whether we can do things better. So it is a very detailed piece of work, and it's aimed at showing a range of measurements that indicate whether the council is performing well or otherwise. So next slide, please, Liz. So as I said, we look to evaluate the annual delivery plan, and this is what this is for essentially for last year. Is a legal requirement, and the assessment method draws on performance data, including our own directorate self-assessments, and I'll take you through what that entails in a moment. Peer challenges and the annual governance statement. What's also important for us, as you'd appreciate, is the outcome of the Let's Talk survey. And there were some interesting points made by members of the public in terms of both our performance and engagement in terms of that survey. So next slide, please, Liz. So just to explain essentially how we make this measurement. So the council has deemed itself in a preliminary standing as good. And the main reason for that is that we've achieved 85% of the 591 planned actions and measurement activities, which were detailed in the annual delivery plan. The other issue that we use is use of resources. And the use of resources is a measurement that we undertake as directors. So we're required to produce a directorate annual plan, which goes through the headings given there: people, assets, finance, including procurement and commissioning, and engagement insight. Each director has to present its plan to a panel, including the chief executive, the chair of the various scrutiny committees and the relevant cabinet members. And we go through these headings and we're tested on those headings to make sure that we've judged ourselves appropriately. So the overall judge of the council's directors in respect of that matter was good, and I'll take you through the details for my directorate shortly to explain how that came about. So the next bullet points there tell you where we've got a judgment of fair attributed to council's finances, commissioning and procurement, to reflect ongoing pressures on the budget, and also the fact that generally the Let's Talk survey talked about the public wishing they would engage better. So that's been recognised within our judgment of ourselves, if you like. The other way we judge ourselves is via the internal audit arrangement, and the internal audit judgment by the independent auditor and our internal audit is of reasonable assurance and explains there why. So we've 82% of the risk-based reviews give either a substantial or reasonable assurance. So essentially, our own internal audit system is saying that our systems and processes are in good health. So next slide, please, Liz. So that gives the future steps for this was the process for the assessment. So this is part of the overall assessment process. Members will be asked to comment on the judgments we provided within this document, and eventually it will be published. It'll be a published document and will be made public. So I think we've been through this timetable before. So this is just reminding you what we presented to you previously. So next slide, please, Liz. This takes you through the detail. So I advise you about our actions and measures. So there's 591 in total. So that shows you the traffic light system we've used. So 85% of those actions and measures were undertaken and are given a green. 2% were amber, and 77, which is 13%, were red. So overall, if you add those together, we've indicated a green status. Underneath, then you've got the various objectives. And just to remind you, the council has 4 objectives, as you're all aware. And this takes you through the various objectives. Just to remind you, Objective 1 is to work with and for our communities. Objective 2, to support learning and employment and sustainable economic growth. And 3 is to support people at home and in their community, which is probably the most relevant to this particular committee. And 4 then to respect, enhance and enjoy our environment. So there are some areas where we need to do more work. Objective 1 there, you'll see there was a red. But overall, the assessment, we put all the measures and actions together, gives us a green. So next slide, please, Liz. Now, this a bit of a busy spreadsheet, but I mentioned before about the directorate assessment. So look at the left-hand matrix there, and you'll see along the top, you've got the various directors. Now, if the print is a bit small, but just look at mine, for example, environment and housing. You'll see that I've judged our work with people as good. So these are our own staff. Finance, commissioning and procurement is fair. Assets is fair. Performance is good. Risk is good. And engagement and insight is fair. So the overall judgment of my directorate, I said was fair. And then the next box you can see, there was a moderation process, and this was, as I said, the members were there, as was the chief executive, and they questioned me, and they felt that my assessment of the directorate's performance for last year was sound. So they basically kept the judgment as fair. So you can see the overall judgment for my directorate was fair, which is, for me, is slightly disappointing because it's less than the other directorates. But if I can explain why essentially that is. We overspent last year as a directorate. Primarily, it was for 2 reasons. One was the fact that we spent double the amount we would normally spend repairing potholes. And members will be aware how important that is to the public. And the other is we are paying a market forces payment to our heavy goods vehicle drivers, which is not budgeted for. And the requirement is to pay that since there was a problem with heavy goods vehicle drivers a few years ago, and the market is still such that we have to retain that payment in order to protect the service. So they're the 2 primary reasons why I mark myself fair in terms of finance. We always look to get within budget. Members appreciate that's getting more and more difficult as challenges become greater. And in terms of engagement and insight, this was an issue essentially to do with the public's perception of the services. Most services are perceived well. So waste, for example, is generally a well-perceived service. There were some issues with the Greenway service when we first started that out, which brought some negativity in the press. But primarily, this is about the negativity we received in respect of highway repairs. So we've already started to do work on that. Members may have noticed that in July we did quite a large piece explaining the process for filling potholes, which was reasonably well received. Because I think some of the issues with members of the public is they may not be as well as informed as they should be, and it's our duty to tell them exactly why we do what we do. So we attempted to do that in July through our social media channels in terms of potholes. And we'll continue to do that in areas where we're challenged. So that explains that, and all the directorate's processes together there gave a good. So I didn't drag my colleagues down too much, but I was hopefully very honest in my approach. The public's view of us is important to me, as I know it is to you, and I felt that their perception of some of the service areas could be better. Hence my judgment. So next slide, please, Liz. So I mentioned the assessment of audit. So in terms of audit, reasonably good performance. So that has been judged as a reasonable assurance. from the governance statement and the internal audit opinion, which shows that our processes are robust. There were a few limited assurance audits within that process, but generally we're receiving reasonable responses from our audits, which is good. So next slide, please, Liz. So this is not an exhaustive list, and I don't intend to go through it, but these are some of the areas of focus. And as it says there, council-wide, some of them came from the work we did at the Let's Talk survey. Some of them have come from members of the public who complain or who write in for other reasons. So just to take you through a few of them. So we've got ongoing workforce recruitment and retention challenges. Councils always have this. We've got quite a rigid pay framework, and it doesn't necessarily take account of the market, and the market can change quite quickly. So we have got some challenges in some of our areas, particularly for technical posts. So we're working through those. But one of the positives that's come out of this, in terms of us having difficulty filling some of our professional posts, is increased our focus on looking at employing young people. So effectively, we train our own. So we've just taken on 4 young people as apprentice engineers, which is the first time we've done that for some years. And you've probably heard Helen in SRS speak before about growing their own in areas such as food hygiene. So this is positive, albeit it takes quite a time to get the young people up to the time where they're able to operate on their own. But this is something that we were looking to do anyway, but because we can't recruit in certain areas, it's actually forced the speed of that process. Increasing workforce diversity is something we're looking at. We are not operating at the same figure as the diversity percentage for the Vale of Glamorgan itself, so which is between 5 and 6%. So we're looking to increase that in our workforce, and working with areas like our agencies who provide particularly frontline workers for us, to make sure that they're given us a good diverse range of applications. Just looking at a few others there. Work collaborative across the council to identify assets that can be put to better use. So you will have seen a report. Perhaps I took to you may have seen it. I took to ENR some years ago about single-use sports. So we've transferred all our the majority of our bowling clubs into the voluntary sector. So we're doing something similar with other sporting organisations, and we're also talking to town and community councils about whether they would be better placed to run certain of our assets. This is out of necessity, because the money available to maintain some of these assets now is insufficient. So we're looking at transforming some of these services to still provide them, but to provide them in a different way. Again, talking about money, maximum opportunities to access and use grant funding across the council services. That's something you've got to get very acute with, and you've got to be looking for all the grant funding available to you. One of the things that you benefit from, if we do transfer assets into the community sector, is they can access grants that we can't. Excuse me. So that's one of the issues we found with the bowling clubs, for example, is they are able to access money that isn't available to us. On the next column, just close to the bottom, develop our oversight of engagement activities across the council. One of the things, and you will have seen the report, that was very challenging, was the public's perception of whether we listen to them or not in terms of consultative arrangements. So we need to strengthen that. We do listen. I can assure anyone that's watching this that we do. Maybe at times we don't evidence that as well as we should. So we're going to be working on that. That's one of the issues we're looking to focus on council-wide. So I think that ends the presentation, Chair. This is a slide I've missed.
No extra slide there, Miles, just to let you know.
That's it. Thank you. Just could you throw one in just to keep me on my toes? So that's it in a nutshell, Chair. Essentially, we've given ourselves a preliminary judgment of good. We accept that that's not going to be the view of every one of our citizens. But essentially, we've judged ourselves against the things we said we were going to do in the annual delivery plan. But we recognise in saying that there is other views out there in terms of some of our service areas. But what we'll do is we'll put the aspects that the public are concerned about, and we already have done with the majority of cases, into the delivery plan for this year, which we're working through now. And over time, I'm hopeful that our judgments will more accurately match the public's general perception of the services we provide. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Miles. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for taking us through that, Miles. I suspect my question might actually be one that needs to be directed towards Mike if he's still on the call, but let's ask it and let's see. So I was interested in the detail within the report, particularly in terms of the wellbeing objectives. Wellbeing objective 3 is about supporting people in their own home and in their community. And I was really interested to see that 16% of housing stock in the Vale is privately rented. And it was really good to see the work that's being done with the private rented sector, particularly at the lower end, to secure that stock for people who might otherwise be at risk of homelessness. I was contacted by a resident last week who'd been given 1 month's notice by her landlord, who was renting her accommodation through the private sector. Legally, she was entitled to 6 months' notice. And, you know, when she came, I reassured her about that. When she came in and met with officers, they explained that to her, and she has now received 6 months' notice. And it just, you know, struck me what an incredibly stressful, it's always stressful if somebody finds himself in that situation. But if the landlord doesn't understand their legal obligations, as in this case, it can really make a very difficult situation even worse. So just wondering what steps we're taking with the private rented sector to ensure that landlords and tenants understand their legal rights, particularly given the recent changes in legislation. And is there any more that we're doing, or planning to do? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I will bring Mike in, but I know for a fact that our advisors, when people present, will give legal advice without prejudice to residents, explain their rights in terms of eviction, because it is something that's happened often, and the advice is to stay put, and we give them further advice as a result of that. But whether Mike's got more he can add to that, but I raised something similar, I think, with Mike last year, because I get quite a few letters which say that my landlord's done this, done that, and our first thing is to retain people in the home that they're legally entitled to. So I was heartened by Mike's and Nick's response to that. So I'll bring Mike in at that point, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah. I think clearly we saw at the outset of the change in the legislation, Renting Homes Act, obviously prior to the new legislation being implemented, a flurry of evictions under the old legislation. And we obviously continue to have see that bubble of homelessness continuing to go through the system, because we're still dealing with those sorts of issues back from a year or so ago. In relation to, you're quite right, in terms of our activity, we have an embedded sheltered worker that works with us within our service. In cases that come across our door, we refer to shelter, who obviously then take the client through whatever processes are appropriate. We have good relationships with CAB. We also have good relationships with Rent Smart Wales. So any landlord or managing agent, as members will be aware, have to be registered with Rent Smart Wales. They have to go through a training programme. They have to be aware of their responsibilities and legal liabilities. And where we do come across landlords who are not complying with their responsibilities, they are referred to our SRS colleagues, who have enforcement and regulatory responsibility for the private rented sector, and also to our colleagues at Rent Smart Wales, who obviously could withdraw their managing status that a landlord might have, and deal obviously with the bad landlords, of which there are a few, we know, and we do deal with those through colleagues in SRS and private sector enforcement. In relation, is there more that we could do in terms of people's rights? Yes, I guess, again, through our social media channels, we can reinforce the legislation. It's probably quite apt at the moment, isn't it? Because as new legislation is introduced in Wales, England follow. And as you know, members will be aware, highly publicised on the news today, the bill that will be going through in relation to a Renting Homes Act type response around no-fault evictions, protecting tenants. Tenants in Wales obviously already have those protections in place. But unfortunately, I guess not all tenants are aware of their rights. So I'm quite happy, and Nick and the team, quite happy to work with our comms team to run some. We did at the time when the new legislation came in, we ran a lot of communication and engagement activity with the implementation. I know Welsh Government did as well. But I'm quite happy again just to raise that, because you're quite right. I mean, we do see the tenants coming to us saying that their landlord has told them that they have to leave, and when we then ask for the relevant notices and what have you, they don't exist. And of course, there are implications then for the landlord about not having to have rent paid, as an example, or other means within the Renting Homes Act, which would cause landlords issues and difficulties, I guess, if they didn't conform. But yeah, I fully appreciate that. It's probably something that we need to run on a regular campaign, really, just to reinforce that tenants, those strengthened rights that tenants have. Other activity that we're undertaking, we've got our own private sector leasing scheme that the council housing department operate, and we're encouraging more and more landlords to come and join us. I know there's a Welsh Government leasing scheme as well, but we feel that the local authority leasing scheme is more flexible and provides greater assurance to the landlords who do work with us. We have a private rented sector coordinator who works very closely with our lettings agents locally in terms of sourcing alternative accommodation, either within the leasing scheme or not. And we do monitor those. We do visit all of those properties. We make sure that those properties are in good condition. And we continue to monitor any private rented accommodation that we place a homeless individual or family into post-tenancy. So I think we do an awful lot in relation to that. But I would agree, quite happy to work with our comms team to rerun that programme of comms and engagement on those rights and responsibilities, both landlords and tenants.
Thanks, Mike. That's really helpful.
Councillor Hanks.
Thank you, Chair. Miles, I was just going to ask you about the complaints that we received. Page 94 have increased considerably, and I just wanted to ask you about those, please.
Okay. Chair, I think our complaints for the period have doubled. Some of them are down to miscollections for our refuse service. Some of them are down to miscollections for the Greenway service as well. And I think you can't blame the public for complaining when their green waste isn't picked up when they're paying for it. So some of the issues in terms of miscollections are down to the fact that we're trying to minimise the resources that we put on a day-to-day basis in terms of the refuse service, because our budgets are tight. So we have breakdowns, or we have vehicle issues or staffing issues. we're a bit slower to respond than perhaps we had been in previous years when finances have been better. But we are working on that. I think one of the ways we can deal with it is by properly publishing our service standards, so that the expectations of the public match the ability of the services we're able to provide. So I think one of the issues with that is the fact that we need to tell people if we're struggling or if we don't have enough resources in an area to provide a really top-class service, if there will be failures that are slightly greater than was previously the case, we need to explain that and explain why that's the case, which we intend to do. But it's mostly due to the waste service, Councillor Hanks, which we're aware of and we are working through. I think the other thing to say as well is the points of failure within the system for the service as it is in terms of recycling are much greater than the previous was the case. The reason being there's a lot more things we're picking up. The vehicles are that much more complicated and they have to be emptied much more frequently. So all that together means that the chances of a failure is more likely than if it was just a compression vehicle with the whole of the waste going into one compartment and being pressed together. So we are working on that. It's still a very low percentage of the collections we make. It's under 1% of the collections we make each day, but it is a figure that we're working on. We're not happy with it.
Yeah, no, because I think, I think the waste is doing a tremendous job, and it was just such a high increase, but also the compliments there are double as well, just about. So I just wondered how that was lying. So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me now? Is it okay? Good, I've pressed the right button. Miles, thanks for that. I just a couple of points and observations, and I think there could be no doubt that the additional stresses and financial pressures that have come down from central government of the past couple of years are still taking their toll and continue to do so. I think I want to place on record my thanks for all the hard work that's been, that staff have undertaken. And it is on occasion the residents, if we're not being open when we're struggling or when we're under pressure ourselves, then residents will have a perception of that we're not doing sort of what we set out to do or promised to do. And on that, I just wanted to talk about, without sort of being too much of a downer, the insight and engagement and the how we and again we've spent a considerable amount of time already referencing the sort of let's talk about the Vale survey, but I think it still is something that is talked about on social media in particular, and to me as a resident, a councillor, when speaking to residents. And as those financial pressures, and you talked about sort of, community asset transfers and grant funding and sort of, safeguarding what we have by sort of engaging local communities, local town councils and community councils. What lessons can we learn around community engagement? So we're looking, and how we sort of look at sort of not just proposals, but design, delivery and evaluation as well. So that, residents feel that their voice has been heard. And even where there has been discord or disagreement, or that the council haven't been able to fulfil the expectations of residents, what is key is that whilst we understand and we've taken on board what the survey told us in terms of how there feels to be a disconnect between residents and the council, what plans are in place to sort of change that? Because maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen any sort of concrete or sort of clear sort of lines of sort of what we will do in particular to sort of build on community engagement and learn the lesson, and let residents know that we have listened and we're going to learn the lessons.
It's a very good question, Councillor. Yeah, you will see the new corporate plan, which we're currently working on, which is from next April for 5 years, very much picks up that emphasis on working with the communities, not doing things to the community. One of the things I would say we've learned is engage very early. Before you formulated your ideas about what you'd like to do, engage very early. So there's co-production Provide, you can never over communicate. I think we don't often put our own story out there, and we rely on reacting to the stories of others, which can be negative. And you're already on the back foot because you're not getting your story out first. You're responding to a negative judgment. So I tell you that one of the things I would point out, Chair, if I could, is if I could just ask committee to have a look at page 88 in the report. I'll just give you a minute to get there. So what that is, it's a schematic essentially where the council spends its money. And if you look at the top two, £602.03 on schools, £432.25 on social care, and then the services that are often complained about, roads and infrastructure, £29.80. Street cleaning and resort management, £15.30. Now, the reason I make that point is not to say that the proportion of money provided to my services should be higher, because clearly education and social care are extremely important. What I would like to say to the public is this is the environment we're working within. We are spending the money where we can on the vulnerable. We're trying to educate children the best we can. But what that means is you can't have everything. It means that you might notice a slight difference in the standard of your maintenance of parks. You might notice a slight difference in the standard of cleanliness of your streets. And instead of criticising, work with us to see how we can improve that, how we can work together to get to the standards that's acceptable to the both of us. So one of the things that I would say about my service is, and I've been here a long time, as you'd appreciate, there's never been a time where it's more important to engage with our citizens and have a conversation with them about what they expect to see, and how they can help us achieve it. There's never been a more important time than this. 74%, I think it is the figure of our overall spend goes on education and social care. That figure will increase. It'll increase because demands in those areas are increasing. That means you need to get really innovative with the remaining funded areas, one of which is frontline services. And I will not give you a doom and gloom prediction because I don't believe in that. I believe that the services can still be provided to a very high standard. They just got to be provided differently. And that's the single most important thing that I'll be working on within the next corporate plan. In order to do that, to answer your point, I guess, in a nutshell, Councillor, we must engage properly and effectively with the public. We must. And they must understand the pressures that we have. It's easy to criticise. It's easy to press a key on any social media platform and have a go at this, that, and the other. If you explain yourself better, the likelihood of that happening is less. The likelihood of someone jumping in and saying, hang on a minute, do you realise how much the council's putting into it's vulnerable? And that's why this looks a bit like that. So that is the fundamental most important thing for me over the next 5 to 10 years, up to 2030, for this council to do, is to engage better, earlier, be more responsive, start at a point where you haven't fully formulated ideas, so you're giving the community the opportunity to essentially design their own services, or design the way they would like things to be delivered. So that's that. I'm on a bit of a mission in that regard, to be honest. So you'll see more and more of that. I mean, I know that I spoke to Tom recently. We're shortly to go out to talk to town and community councils. We did that process a while ago, we recall. But when we spoke to them, I think we were a little unclear about what we were expecting them to work with us on. And it went round into circles a little bit. And we're very good councils at dictating what we think you should have. That has to change. And I'm confident that it is changing. So we'll be meeting town and community councils saying, we'd like to deliver all these services to our public. If you look at the budget projections over the next 10 years, it's going to be more and more difficult. How can we work together to achieve that standard? So it is a very, very important piece of work, and it's intertwined with the you'll be pleased to know, with the detail of the next corporate plan that you'll be asked to agree. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Councillor, but it's a big challenge, but I accept that challenge, as do my fellow directors. But it starts with early comms, honesty, explaining the detail. Page 88, let's have a chat about that. And then hopefully there'll be a greater reality. Expectations will be balanced with the services we're able to provide, rather than some expectation we're not able to deliver. Because we can keep trying to deliver and keep failing. If we say, well, we've only got so much money because this is the way the council's budgets are set up, that's a better conversation. How should we do this? How should we do this together? So we've got some good examples. We're working with Lantern Major Town Council on the possible transfer of some car parks and toilets. We've already worked with Dennis Powis. We've already worked with Barry. So we've got some really good examples. We've worked with Penarth. So it's just more of that work, I guess. Bring in these services into focus locally more, and hopefully involving the community and volunteers to a greater extent. Thank you, Chair.
Am I okay to come back on that, Chair? Just
yes, of course.
I mean, the from doing to enabling, that's really key. And I think that as our financial position continues to sort of be a strain, I think that hearing what you've said is really encouraging. Like you, I'm an advocate for that. It's sort of listening rather than and sort of mobilising and organising rather than servicing. And I think that getting the residents on board is going to be critical to that, because they've been for generations been used to a council saying we are doing this, so we will do this, rather than what you know, what you want, what you need. And this is, having that open discussion. So I welcome those comments. Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anybody else wishing to speak on that? I don't see any hands up. No indication. Okay. Are committee happy to note this reference? Committee happy to move a note? Councillor Lover-Edwards? And Councillor Hanks, are you seconding? Councillor Hanks, you did have your hand up. Are you seconding? Can't hear you, Councillor Hanks.
Yep, second it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Miles, for that. Now, as agreed with committee earlier, Miles is sticking with us for agenda item 10 that has been moved up, and this is the annual delivery plan monitoring report. Thank you, Chair. This is the first quarter monitoring for the annual delivery plan for 24-25. And it is, I know we're in the 6th month now, but this was produced at month 3, so that the detail is not as it will be towards the end of the year. So, Chair, if you're happy, what I'll do, if I ask committee to turn to page 6, which is the colourful page, which is a little bit of a précis on this first quarter. And what I'll do, I'll take you through what we've achieved. As I say, it's only a 3-month snapshot, and some of our challenges, and then take any questions. I will, at this point, offer a comment in terms of the setup. Previously, when you've seen this report, we have the traffic light process, and we generally have the measures and actions associated with this committee that are red. So this is not within this particular report. What you'll see attached as the appendix for the full 173 pages is the full measures and actions for the entire council. So there are a few reds in there associated with this committee, and I'll touch on a few of them as I go through, Chair. So firstly, it's split up to the 4 objectives, which are in the corporate plan, and I've taken you through those previously.
So just touching on a couple of the what we've achieved in terms of objective 1, funding an agreement in place to take forward the development of a new extra care scheme for older people in Penarth, and SRS successfully introduced mobile devices to undertake food inspections as part of a pilot to improve efficiency. That is a really good point. That it enables us to undertake more inspections because the previous arrangement was quite laborious. In terms of objective 2, community investment team continue to work with housing tenants who experience barriers to employment, and it mentions some of the interventions there. And then also using social value clauses in our council house building contracts. One good thing about building properties is we are able to influence the contractors in respect of social value. So next slide, which is again what we've achieved, objective 3 and 4. So I'll just touch on a few of the bullet points. So continue to work with our partners via the Youth Justice and Early Support Service, focusing on prevention work with good outcomes being achieved. So we do quite a lot of extensive work in neighbourhood services and transport with a probation service. They are one of the volunteer groups that provide quite a lot of output for us for work that we would ordinarily be doing ourselves. So that's really positive. They also step in on areas such as private land where we have difficulty accessing the owner or getting responses from the owner. So that's quite positive to work with them. Objective 4, we've got a number of local engagement projects underway to tackle specific issues on housing estates, projects to reduce rubbish and fly tipping and environmental work. So I mentioned before about using the public to help us, and this is one of the examples of that, people looking after their own estates and working on community gardens and planting. So one of the things we're going to be looking at next year as well is whether we can involve the community and schools in some of the planting in our parks, because one of the issues we will struggle with is funding the amount of bedding that we've previously put in each year. So people sponsoring or adopting areas of our parks to plant themselves is something that we are looking at. And then at the bottom there, local initiatives underway to promote recycling and reuse through a range of community and development projects. You may have noticed the shop down at the Atlantic Train Estate. It is our aspiration over time to have a similar facility linked to the Western Vale HWRC. So areas for improvement, just a few. Business engagement meetings have taken place with further emphasis around increased marketing of existing services and training courses, re-engaging on other paid for services as revamping SFBB visits, coaching and charging for packs, etc. And we've got objective 3, a follow-up call for Gypsy and Traveller sites has been completed, and reviews of available land are currently underway. Objective 4, one of the things that members are clearly interested in, and I seem to have been involved in this project for many years, is the appraisal of funding arrangements to provide alternative sewer arrangements for residents at Channelview, Marcos and Croft John, Penmark. So that's something we're looking to progress within the next few months. Next slide, emerging areas of development and activity. So objective 1, take forward results from engagement work to inform community safety response through increased police presence and partnership approaches. We recognise that there's been increases in antisocial behaviour in certain areas, so we're working with the police and other partners such as youth offending to actually try and reduce that. And then over in objective 3, business case being prepared to take account of the council's resettlement responsibilities in line with the current pledges. So available specific settlement coordinator continues to take a lead in these areas and works closely with contracted support providers as well as the in-house Ukrainian support team. So homelessness and housing remains one of our main priorities and will do for a long period to come. Objective 2, support learning, employment and sustainable community economic growth. Community investment team again continue to extend the reach and support work in relation to council housing tenants experiencing barriers to employment, another issue that's very important to us. So the next slide then, emerging areas of concern. This is a red point within the document that follows. So progress work with the Police and Crime Commissioner, essentially to identify opportunities for the establishment of longer term funding arrangements. We are funded annually. So we're looking to see if we can have an arrangement where we can guarantee funding over a longer period, which allows us to get involved in longer, more effective programs. So it says there the team manager was absent for a period. That did slow us down slightly, but the team manager is back in work, so that should be something that we can take on now. So objective 3. These are challenges they always have been. So shortage of land available for housing development, shortage of housing accommodation and temporary housing. We have so many people in housing need, and we do get a lot of pressure. People saying, "Oh, councils continuing to build houses." It's something that I'm not at all ashamed of. If they saw the situation that some of our tenants were experiencing, or people who were not in tenancies were experiencing, they perhaps would have a slightly different view. So very proud of our council housing building programme, and long may that continue. In terms of objective 4 then, I mentioned the Channel View Marcross again. We mentioned the circular economy and the range of community-based development projects. And then we say there's a need to manage expectations when working and delivering within our communities. And that is a point that I mentioned earlier in terms of having an honest conversation with our communities. So, Chair, that's a snapshot. The report is very long and detailed. There's not many reds, primarily because it's very early in the year. There is a red for Marcross, and I understand that members are concerned that is still dragging on. But I'm happy to take questions on any of the detail within the report, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Miles. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any hands up. Okay, so I'm going to go to the recommendations then. The recommendations are that the committee consider Q1 performance results and progress towards achieving the annual delivery plan 2024 and 2025 commitments. And the second is that we consider the remedial actions to be taken to address areas of underperformance and to tackle the key challenges identified within the remit of the committee, with views and recommendations referred thereafter to Cabinet. Are we happy to move those recommendations?
Happy, Chair.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Hennessy? Can't see you.
Oh, that's better. Sorry, I hit the wrong buttons. Yeah, go on, I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much, Miles. Can you thank everybody for all their work on these two reports tonight?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so agenda item 6 then, back up on the agenda is the closure of accounts 2023 to 24, and Gemma is going to take this.
Hi, good evening, Chair. Okay, so this is the outturn position for the 23-24 accounts, and very much provisional. So the final accounts are currently with the external auditor, Audit Wales, for audit, and that will be ongoing for the next couple of months. So the overall council position is set out in Appendix 1 of the report, and I think we saw at outturn some of those key themes of pressure that we've been reporting throughout the year, such as additional learning needs, pressures across social services, some of the pressures Miles highlighted earlier around road maintenance and HGV drivers, and also around homelessness. were still there at outturn, albeit some of those pressures had diminished slightly in terms of the outturn position, and were offset by additional one-off surplus within the policy and council tax budget. So the council did quite well in terms of collecting historic arrears of council tax in year, and that was able to offset some of those service pressures in year. And we also had slightly more internal borrowing and better investment income. And so that meant that we were able to draw on those service reserves at slightly reduced manner. But those service pressures are very much still there. And you'll see that then as we talk about Q1 monitoring, and we will be shortly bringing before you the 25-26 budget strategy as well. The service-specific positions for this committee are set out in appendices 2, 3 and 4, and 4 is the HRA service appendix. Just to draw out some key themes, so general fund housing, whilst those homelessness pressures are very much there was additional grant in year, and also additional grant relating to resettlement, and that additional grant was transferred into the housing and homelessness reserve at year end, and will help mitigate those pressures as we go forward into future years, and that resettlement need and support for those individuals as well. The other underspends that we were reporting in the areas that are relevant to this scrutiny committee largely offset some of those kind of core overspend areas. So there was regulatory service underspend, for instance, offset some of that neighbourhood services overspend for the reasons we outlined. In terms of savings, most of the housing savings were achieved in year. There was a small saving private housing that wasn't achieved, and that will be kept under review as part of the 24-25 monitoring, and there is some progress that's made there that we'll pick up in one of the other reports. In terms of the HRA position, it does report a deficit outturn, but that very much was a planned deficit outturn because that use of capital expenditure funded from the revenue account is deliberate to bring down that reserve balance. So whilst it reports a deficit, that's in a planned way to fund capital expenditure and bring the reserve balance. We did not reduce the reserve balance as much as we set out in the housing improvement plan. But again, that was a deliberate decision. So given the scale of the housing programme now, as a Section 151 officer that has to make a prudent decision about how much to hold in reserve. And that's why we've held then that slightly higher figure. But that will need to be reviewed then as we set the next housing improvement plan as we go into the autumn. In terms of reserves, as the kind of headline figure for the council, they reduced from 110 million to around 76 million. So not as much as we'd projected at Q3, but that's still obviously a significant reduction, and obviously those reserves can only be used once, as members will be aware. So once used, those reserves are not there to be used for resilience or transformation going forward. So those are the main points I was going to draw out on the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions? I see no hands up, so I'll go straight to recommendations. The recommendations are 1, that the report and financial measures taken and proposed be noted, and 2, that the allocation of overall council surplus as set out below be noted. 2 million transfer to new reserve to offset school deficits on a provisional basis in 2024-25. And 80,000 to council fund to offset general pressures. Are we happy to accept those recommendations? Councillor Lovelock-Edwards?
Chair.
Oh, Councillor Hanks, yes, no worries. And Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you also have your hand up. Are you seconding?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 7 then, capital closure of accounts 2023-24, and Laura is going to take this. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Chair. Evening, everyone. Before I start, I must point out that I've lost connection on this call twice so far, so I'm hoping for the best. I'll plow on regardless, but hopefully we'll be fine. So capital closure of accounts 2023-24. The report outlines the outturn of the 23-24 capital programme by directorate and details the funding sources used to fund the programme. Despite capital schemes facing continued challenges due to a number of issues, including significant cost increases and shortages of resources, it's pleasing to note that the Council's 23-24 capital programme outturned with a spend of 88.62 million, with 85% of the programme being spent by the end of the year. Due to the dedication, commitment and hard work across all directorates, the report notes the adjusted programme of £103.8 million and net slippage of just over £15 million into the 24-25 capital programme, which required approval by emergency powers. Detailed within the report are sections highlighting some of the schemes that have been successfully delivered in the 23-24 capital programme. This includes the completion of the development of 53 new homes at Hayswood Road. The council took on construction and site management responsibilities and employed agents to supervise the process while subcontractors completed the works. And in February 2024, the council completed and handed over the first 14 new homes, with the remaining 39 new homes being handed over in phases throughout spring and early summer. This innovative way of self-delivering new council homes will be used to deliver further schemes at Colebrook Road East and Olive Lodge, both in Barry. The projects relevant to this committee are listed in Appendix 1 and show a £41.875 million spend on an adjusted budget of £48.398 million. The majority of the spend was due to the housing improvement programme, where £40.865 million was spent on major improvements to the council's housing stock. And slippage of £6.521 million into the 24-25 capital programme has now been approved for all projects within this committee's remit, and they are listed in Appendix 3 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Concise as always. Does anybody have any questions? Silence. So I will take that as nobody has any questions, and I'll go to the recommendations. There are 4 recommendations on this. The first is that committee note the year-end capital position for financial year 23-24. The second, that committee note the additional scheme budgets as set out in Appendix 1. Number 3 is that committee note the summary position of the changes in the capital programme by directorate from approval at Council on 6th of March 23 to 31st of March 24, as set out in Appendix 2. And the final recommendation is that committee note the emergency power approved in respect of the slippage as set out in Appendix 3. Are committee happy to move those recommendations to accept them?
Happy to move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor White. Thank you, Councillor Hanks. Laura, are you or Gemma doing the next item? It's yourself again, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. So the next item is the Q1 revenue monitoring.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the position of the revenue budget as at the 30th of June 2024. There are significant budget pressures across the authority, including increased homelessness costs, as Gemma's mentioned previously. The homelessness pressures have, however, been mitigated in year by increased Welsh Government grant funding. So the planned drawdown from the Housing and Homelessness Reserve will be less than anticipated. All services across all services, inflationary pressures are also being experienced in respect of staff pay and the funding gap between budgeted provision for the 24-25 pay award and the likely pay award for 24-25, as well as non-pay inflation. A challenging savings and efficiency target of £7.67 million has been agreed for all services for 2024-25, and progress against these savings targets is reflected in the report, with 76% of the savings projected to be achieved or mitigated in year. This is partly due to the time required to effectively implement savings of this scale, but also reflects capacity within teams. Delays in implementing these savings will impact on the 24-25 outturn across services. One saving within this committee's remit is showing as amber on the right status. The Invest to Save initiative for the Vales Pest Control Service for 24-25 is not expected to be achieved this year, although it is anticipated that additional income will be generated over and above set-up costs in future years. But in year one, it's anticipated that the shortfall will be met by other variances against budget allocations in 24-25, but this will be kept under review. In context of the significant and sustained service pressures, unplanned use of reserves is currently projected to be approximately £13.629 million across the council. There are various work streams progressing to mitigate the unplanned use of reserves and reduce the in-year overspends. These are outlined in the report. This unplanned use of reserves will significantly reduce the reserves available by 31st March 2025, and the projected position is set out in Table 3, with reserves potentially reducing to just over £50 million. Highlights from the report relevant to this committee are that the public sector housing, i.e. the Housing Revenue Account or HRA, is expected to outturn on target, and any under or overspends in year will be offset by changes to the contributions to capital expenditure, hence changing the drawdown from the Housing Revenue Account reserve. The Disabled Facilities Grants Revenue budget is currently forecast to be £43,000 overspent, although it's hoped that increased fee income from the new discretionary adaptations grants will improve this position by year end. The Youth Offending Service is currently projecting an underspend of £176,000, due mostly to vacant posts within the service. And lastly, the projected outturn for the Council Fund housing budget is an underspend of £100,000. This is due to additional grant funding, some of which was awarded late last year, which will reduce the budgeted drawdown from reserves. And there are also underspends on vacant posts in the service due to staff secondments due to grant-funded schemes. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Anybody have any questions? Again, silence. Again, I'll go straight to recommendations then. There are two. And the first is that the position with regard to the authority's 2024-25 revenue budget be noted. And the second, that members note the violence requested as part of this report. Are committee happy to accept the recommendations?
Move we note.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Happy to second.
Thank you. And the final item, I'm guessing it's you again, Laura. It's capital monitoring for the period 1st of April to 30th of June 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start with an apology, please? Can I just clarify that the purpose of this report is that committee notes the progress on the capital programme for the period April to June. The narrative on the circulated report refers to change requests which are the remit of Cabinet. So it's literally requested that this committee note the report. So sorry for the confusion.
Okay.
It's further requested that committee note that delegated authority has been approved in relation to the allocation of the original 2024-25 Housing Improvement Programme capital budget of £38.745 million, as outlined in Table 5 within paragraph 2.27 of the report. Changes following emergency powers approval, together with approved slippage from 2023-24, are also shown in this table, and the resulting total housing improvement programme budget is reflected in the total budget column, showing as £45.626 million for the year. The Council continues to provide means-tested disabled facilities grants, or DFGs, to eligible individuals. However, in the past, recipients have found themselves needing to make high cash contributions to be eligible for these grants. And the Council has therefore introduced a new discretionary adaptations grant, or DAG, that doesn't require means testing for applicants, but does involve placing a charge on the property to the value of works carried out. The original DFG 24-25 capital budget was £1.096 million, but it's been approved that a new capital budget for these DAGs be included, funded by varying £300,000 from the existing DFG budget. In addition, some £210,000 from the DFG budget was carried back into 23-24 to cover overspends on the DFG capital budget last year. So this leaves a capital budget for DFGs this year of £796,000. The Q1 position for this committee, and detailed in Appendix 1, shows total spend as at the 30th of June of just over £5 million, with a forecast outturn spend of £47.134 million, currently the full budget. It is important to note, however, that many areas are continuing to experience an increase in costs associated with the delivery of schemes. Tenders are being received over the current allocated budgets, and officers are reporting the need to renegotiate submitted tenders. So schemes will be closely monitored over the coming months, and it's anticipated that slippage requests will likely be requested in future reports. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? I don't see any questions coming from committee. So again, I will go straight to the recommendations. And the first is that the progress made on delivering the 24-25 capital programme within the remit of the committee be noted in the attached Appendix 1. The second, that the use of delegated authority within the remit of the committee, summarised in paragraph 2.5 and detailed in the report at paragraph 2.27, be noted. The third, that the use of emergency powers within the remit of the committee, detailed in Appendix 1 to the report, be noted. And the fourth is that the changes to the 2024-25 capital programme and future years capital programme within the remit of the committee, summarised in paragraph 2.4 and detailed within the body of the report from 2.12, be noted. Are committee happy to accept those recommendations? Councillor Lawson. Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Leather-Edwards?
Happy to note. Second.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Laura. And if Gemma is still on the line, thank you as well, Gemma. If not, can you please pass our thanks on?
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of this meeting. All I have left to do is to remind you that the next committee is, yes, the 9th of October at 6 p.m. Thank you all for attending tonight. I will see you at the next meeting. Now go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Night, everyone.
Thank you all.